And even the moderate abolitionists were looking at the government as the organization that makes slavery possible. And I think that's absolutely correct. There were states in the South by 1860 where half the population was black, right? There's no way on the planet you can control that many people by force unless you have a larger organization such as the US military that you know you can depend on to enforce the rule of the government, right? Of the state, and therefore to enforce slavery. Um, and so the abolitionists were correct in seeing the government as the core issue. That its power to force and to compel people to obey it against their will, that overwhelming violence, militarized violence, social violence, to be able to terrorize people into obedience, even when they knew what they were doing was wrong, was one of the central problems of their times. And everything they did was working either to try and change the government, such as with Douglas and his people, or as he was a representative of one wing of the abolitionists, whether they were trying to elect people that would change the law, or people like Garrison who began to realize that in some ways that wasn't enough,
Mm.
because even if you free people from, even if you're to free um, people of African descent from slavery, you would still have the power of the state to rule over them. And that's what happened, right? We went from slavery to sharecropping. And so technically sharecroppers in 1866 had were free legally, but the conditions were no different than as if they'd been slaves. So abolitionism then was concerned about ending the ability of the government to control people through violence. And that's the same issue we still have today, right? Um, I'm not interested in a more benevolent ruler, right? Freedom is not whether I have permission to do something from the government. I am not free to do something just because the government allows me to do something. If there's ever a possibility then that the government could take away from me my right to do something, such as speak freely, which has happened repeatedly in American history, then I'm not free. I simply have a more benevolent ruler today than people in the past have had. But I'm not interested in benevolent tyrants. I want true freedom.
Mhm.
True freedom is the ability to live and speak and act however you choose, as long as you are not engaging in violence and oppression of others, right? And so the key challenge to that today is the same challenge abolitionists had then, which is the threat of violence from the government. Because the government doesn't really want you to be free, and it doesn't really want you to be educated. It wants you to be smart enough to operate a forklift and to go and push a button when you vote. It does not want you to be smart enough to actually question the ideas that justify its existence. And it does not want you to have the freedom to live how you choose. It wants you to obey it. That's
Mm.
what people in power want. They want two things: your money and your obedience. Everything else doesn't matter to them because those are the two things that keep them in power and keep them wealthy. And so the fundamental issue is the same one that the abolitionists faced in 1830, 1840, 1850, 1860, and beyond. That we are faced with an organization that is able to act with overwhelming violence, that it constantly indoctrinates us into its obedience, and that if we try to live freely, it will use that violence to oppress and control us. It will punish us, it will cage us, it will shackle us, it will kill us. This might be controversial to many people, but the fundamental difference between you and a slave is not very big because the government still claims to be able to do the same to you. Right? If you think about what constitutes slavery, slavery is a person has no freedom. They cannot live how they choose. They cannot marry who they choose. They cannot smoke, eat, or drink what they choose. They cannot go where they choose. They cannot associate with who they choose, right? They do not control their property. They do not control their money. They do not control their work, right? And if they challenge the master uses violence and, well, torturous violence in most cases to terrorize that person back into obedience. All right, well, look at where we're at today. Many people have already experienced what happens when you dare to smoke or drink something that the government doesn't want you to, right? You cannot leave the country without permission. If you try to, they will imprison you. We've already seen that the government has no compunctions about locking you in your home for your own good, right? They will claim, well, we're trying to keep you safe, so we're going to treat you like a prisoner, right? Like you're under house arrest, put you in your home, and if you walk outdoor, you could be fined or imprisoned. So the government claims the authority to control where you go, to claim the authority to who you talk to, right? This is the issue, not just with lockdowns, but like immigration. You have no right to decide who you want to interact with and associate with because you cannot leave and they cannot come in. You can't buy or sell or trade with whoever you want. If you buy something you're not allowed to buy to, they'll put you in prison for it. If you don't pay your taxes, right? The government claims just because of its existence that has the authority to extract, extort, steal, however you want to put it, your money from you. And it gets to decide how much it takes and when it takes it, and you've got no authority over it. If you don't do it, they will put you in prison. If you resist being put in prison, they'll kill you. Sorry, I lost my place. But your property, if you live in a place with property taxes, you don't have property, you have rent, right? If you don't pay your property tax, they'll fine you at first. But if you keep not paying your property tax, they will imprison you and take your property. They'll take your home. You don't own it anymore. Same thing with anything else. If I want to use my vehicle, if I want to use my car, I have to pay for the permission to do so. Right? I can't just drive. I have to get permission from the state, and I have to do that regularly. So when you really start thinking about it, yes, the immediate violence in our lives is significantly less than someone on a plantation in 1850. But the ideas that justified slavery still exist. The ideas that made slavery possible are still real. And we live under them every day. We're subjected to them every day. That's what the state is. A plantation, which is the state in miniature. We live in a larger state where perhaps simply because there are so many of us, it can be harder to pinpoint us at any moment. But that's disappearing over time very quickly. The government can track you down at any moment, right? Edward Snowden revealed a decade ago that the government was spying on the public regularly, recording phone calls, text messages, emails without their knowledge and without their permission. So the government really is tracking us and keeping tabs on us. And I know that might sound crazy, but we have the actual NSA documents to prove it. And I mean, look at what Elon Musk is revealing on Twitter right now about the fact that the US government was using, well, Joe Biden the Twitter was taking orders from Joe Biden to suppress news information that was critical of him and his son and to promote news that made him look good, right? So these major organizations are in bed with those in power. And when you start thinking about it, we find ourselves in a very similar situation as the oppressed of many years have. And
Mm.
I think we often, because our shackles are softer, right? There's a scriptural term, flaxen cords, that the devil will capture you with his flaxen cords. Flax being a very soft rope, like it's smooth, but it's strong and tight. It's a similar concept here, right? We're trapped, and because it feels nice, we don't recognize the ropes and the binds on us, on our hands, on our bodies, on our minds. But once you start to see them, they're everywhere. And I don't just mean that in a sense where, oh, we all live in a society and society has expectations, of course. But you mentioned Hopeville earlier. It was Hopedale,
Hopedale.
right?
Yeah.
Hopedale. Sorry, Hopeville's from a video game. Hopedale. Um, if you look at early American history, there's all kinds of stuff like that. You've got the Oneida community, you've got Hopedale, you've got the Mormons in Nauvoo, in Illinois, and Utah. The idea that we could, yeah, we all live part of society, but we could just gather together and make our own society and put our ideas into practice and see what works, right? You don't even have that freedom anymore. You can't join with a community like that anymore. You can't exercise even that limited amount of freedom.
Mm.
Um, and so our lives have become easier because of technology, but our liberty is becoming more and more limited every day. And that's what we need freedom for, more now than ever before, just as much as they did in 1860.